Welcome to Equipping Leaders, a podcast where I share and discuss resources, tools, and information to equip leaders to build creative, cohesive teams through culture and leader development. Welcome to the Equipping Leaders podcast. I am your host, Natasha, and in today's episode, I am sharing a conversation with Leadership Development Manager and Facilitator Kristen Tusor on leadership styles, building leadership programs, and skill sets required at different levels of leadership. At one point in the history of leadership, there were different styles of leadership, and the belief at the time was that a leader had a specific style that they could literally just be aligned to. The styles ranged from authoritative to democratic to coaching, and people were pigeonholed into one or maybe two styles. Over time, we have acknowledged and now we understand the value of leaders who are agile enough to navigate many styles, depending on the situation, the team composition, and the organization.
Welcome, Kristen. I'm so excited to have you here today. Can I have you introduce yourself and tell us your style of leadership?
Natasha, thank you so much for having me here. I was so excited when you asked me to do this. And I also want to give you a massive shout out for this podcast. It's brilliant, it's relatable, and I'm learning a lot from it as I've listened to a few of the episodes. So thank you. My name is Kristen Tusor, and I'm a senior manager of talent development at Electronic Arts. And my focus there has been kind of a mixed bag over the years. I've been with the company for just over 3.5 years. I've done a lot within EA. There's been some focus on some of our large scale, medium scale learning events that have touched a lot of the different organizations and populations within the company. But I have a pretty strong background in learning and development, whether it's independent contributor, whether it's been leadership. I've switched into a role this year where I'm focusing on leadership development, more specifically on high potential talent and the director and senior director population at the company.
You never know when and where someone will need to step in or step up, right? So you have this suite of skills, if you will, or of tools that whatever that leadership position or situation needs, then they're actually able to step into that and lead different parts of an organization if they're not the one leading the whole organization.
Yeah, agreed. And also knowing where all the skills that they've developed. What you'll know about me is that corporate terminology really freaks me out. Even though I've always worked in the corporate world, I try my best to avoid it at all costs. However, sometimes it's just the word that you need. So when you go into your toolkit or your toolbox and pull out those skills, knowing what you can adapt to those leadership positions as they come up, and also know how you can be versatile in using those skills and how something may not immediately translate to something that's required in senior leadership. But upon reflection, you can really look back and say, yes, that skill 100% applies in this situation, just in a little bit of a different way. So really using that collection of experiences and tools that you've collected throughout the years and applying them in whatever crazy challenge you find yourself in as a senior leader, or intense challenge or critical challenge, whatever pops up and may be happening on any given day.
So when it comes to leadership skills and tasks, and we're building this bench, are there leadership styles that just can immediately jump in while others just need to be cultivated more?
That's a really good question. So in not just Electronic Arts, but I think in a lot of the companies I've worked for, and they're bigger companies, like the names are recognizable. So large global companies that I've worked for. I think that as you're advancing in that level and to be able to jump in as a leader at that level, when we're looking at leadership styles, the words that pop out immediately are coaching, curiosity, and collaborative. I think at that level, what I've seen, and disclaimer, I'm not a director. I'm not a senior director and I'm not a vice president. So, but I have worked with those different audiences and populations. So as I've seen people move either into those positions or they're already in those positions, and let's say that I'm working with them on an initiative or a learning piece, whatever that might look like, I think in order to move into those positions as well as be successful and be able to grab whatever tool you need throughout your collection of experiences, having a coaching style of leadership, maintaining curiosity, and also being quite collaborative is going to serve you well. Because specifically in the industry that I'm in the games industry, there are so many things to consider. There is a lot that is still a mystery to me about this industry because it's just humongous. So we can't expect any of our leaders to know everything. I think it would be foolish to think that someone in a very senior leadership position could act with only one tool that has been pulled from their toolkit throughout their experiences. I think coaching others shows that you have that open mind and you're also willing to not accept failure, but acknowledge failure in a sense of why something may not have worked. So you're approaching challenges in a much different way, which chances are that's what helped get you to that position in the first place. That's what elevated your career. And if you're maintaining curiosity, you're also demonstrating to others that you're open-minded. You're totally there for what others may bring to the table. Diversity of thought is imperative to the success of any of our teams. And then if we look at collaborative, once again, it's impossible and foolish to think that one leader could know absolutely everything. But one thing that I've seen successful leaders at EA do quite well is if you're in the room and you're giving a perspective and a point of view, they are willing to consider it and listen to it and see if it fits into the larger plan, the larger vision, or the larger process, let's say, strategy.
First, I really appreciate that you identified these skills and abilities, the coaching, curiosity, collaborative, versus a specific style. And I know that leadership literature has been kind of getting away from the leadership styles type of thing. But ultimately, that a leader needs to know how to use those skills or use those abilities given the situation.
When you and I discussed this subject for this episode of your podcast, I have an education degree, so we even went back to like my teaching notes and back to the university days, and also just looked at some of the current definitions, just to, look at what's out there right now. And I totally agree. Looking at some of the past definitions of your autocratic style, or if we're looking at participative, and then the delegative style. So those are three styles of leadership. In reading those three styles and in preparing for this conversation, I thought, yes, those are leadership styles, but today's leaders require this unicorn combination and adaptability to the styles that have been established, throughout the ages. So absolutely, leadership styles, we can 100% categorize them and say this is a style, this is a style. However, when I'm talking about coaching, collaboration, curiosity, I feel like those are almost the styles that are, and I'm basing this on nothing. I'm basing this on me and what I've experienced. So there are no books that say this out there. Maybe there are. I'm sure there are, Natasha. You could probably list 5 right now. But I see it more as adaptability between all of those styles that have been established in the past. That's why I got excited when you brought that up, because absolutely they are out there. I rarely see a situation where only one will work, and it has to be a combination now. I think learners are diverse. I think situations are diverse, and to exercise flexibility is the most important aspect of any leadership style or any leader out there right now.
Even as you're talking about those different styles, when I think of a leader, every leader needs to know how to be participative. And every leader needs to know how to delegate. So it's almost like they were taking a skill and trying to make it a style, which probably for a while worked. But now, like you said, this unicorn person who can move in between all these different styles given the situation. And that's where it really tied into what I love what you said around the curiosity piece, because maybe 100 or more years ago, leaders outside of huge institutions like the military, but leaders, their job was to ask questions, and it wasn't their job to have all the answers. And then we kind of moved into the great man theory, where old mentality about leadership, where first leaders are men, but also that they look a certain way and they have the answers and they never say, I don't know. And we moved into that style, and it stuck for a couple decades, but actually not that long. And then we started to move out of it, but people really held on to that. And now we're really seeing that leaders have to be able to ask questions and have to have that curiosity at all times to be able to be like a C-suite executive who can think like a Gen Z individual or any other generation. I see that as kind of being the biggest gap. So that ability to ask questions and that curiosity to say, let's try it and see how it goes, or tell me more about that so that I can understand.
Absolutely. And be a leader who surrounds yourself with a team who fills in those blind spots that you may have. We all, based on our experiences, we have a point of view on the world. We have a point of view on the work that we do. We have a point of view on how learning and development should unfold. My learning style or my preference on how something should be facilitated may not be the same as yours, just based on our experiences and our learning styles. And so I would have a hard time collaborating with a leader who went solely on their experiences without listening to who else was at the table. And I think some companies are doing this very well in having diversity of thought be a huge component in their hiring practices, because then those gaps are being filled in, those blind spots are being accounted for. And I think that's something that really strong leaders are doing, in that they may not be the unicorn, but they have created a team that allows them to be a unicorn because they know who to call upon or who to get the advice of in very specific situations that they may not have a lot of experience in.
And while I know we've both encountered people who just seem to, regardless of how young they are, have really great natural leadership tendencies and have that natural curiosity, are very collaborative. Since you've worked with people at different levels of leadership, have you seen there to be a struggle with kind of embracing those new skills at any particular level?
That's an awesome question. I consider myself incredibly lucky. I have worked for some phenomenal companies. I'm so grateful for the companies that I've worked for because I've taken something from all of them. I haven't not stolen anything. That's not what I'm saying. But I've taken knowledge and experience and I've reflected upon it and reflected on, why I've acted in certain situations with various companies. So I've been very lucky to have, for the most part, incredibly good leaders that I've been surrounded by. In times where perhaps they haven't embraced those qualities as much, there was a strong disconnect between the front line, let's say, and the people at the top. And in those situations, it was very interesting because, much like I said, bringing in those people to identify your blind spots and giving them face and the voice and the confidence in their credibility to help with those blind spots and to help find solutions to some of those trickier problems. That was when I saw things fall apart a bit. If that wasn't happening, that's when there was increased attrition. That's when there was distrust towards leaders. That's when it got a little bit messier. I think when you would take someone into your team based on all of these amazing qualifications, but then they just weren't validated. The reason that really stands out is because it wasn't just one case I noticed of that, it was a few things happening in that space. So I think that would be one of the situations where if you're a leader and you're bringing in people to fill those spaces, And to support the success of the business, you need to trust them and give them the space to do so. As company culture changes, companies who don't follow suit with that most likely are going to have a hard time finding really quality employees.
It reminds me of an experience I had previously where I was in an organization, and when people would come into the organization, it was a very self-driven, the leader would say, you tell me what the problems are, and I'll provide you with the resources to solve those problems. So with that piece, I love what you said. When people come into an organization, leaders have to trust them, but also there's that element of leaders, you need to understand who needs more direction and who doesn't. Because in that situation of the organization that I was in, some people did amazing. They went forward, they did amazing things, they felt very fulfilled. And other people really struggled because they needed more structure. They needed a lot more structure than what that was. When someone comes into your organization and you trust them to do these different things, you can tell pretty quick, I think, if someone needs a little more structure, or like you said, if they just need to be validated.
Yep. I love that, because I would say it was my first week when I was a training specialist. In my first week, I remember the director of our team walked me through the situational leadership model, something that I hadn't really used before. And just going through the different phases of when to really pour it on, depending on where someone's at, and then where you can take your foot off the gas a little bit, see how they react, and then when you can just start validating and really seeing someone through that journey. And Natasha, I think that's such an important shout out that you made on, yes, trust your employees, but be present as a leader so that you know where they're at. And there are junior folks on your team at the beginnings of their career who do need a little bit more guidance and need that framework and expectations to work within. You also have folks who have been promoted into new roles, who it's almost like starting all over again. Yes, they're jumping into a new role, but it's a very different role. So you need to be a bit more present in those first few months. And then once they've built their own credibility and have gained that confidence, and, helping get them to that point where they have that confidence that they can take more ownership and start driving the direction of different projects and initiatives, knowing when to step back at that point and let them fly and see what they do with it. So I totally agree that trust within reason.
And I liked the pieces that you brought up with the situational leadership and that presence, because there's also an element, depending on someone's experience in the workplace, where if you're the leader and you ask them a yes or no question, because of how we are socialized as children, and then even through part of our college years, when an authoritative figure asks you a yes or no question, you say the answer that's the easiest for that person and not what's best for you. I just appreciate when leaders can really not only have that presence to understand the different people, but also when you're having a conversation with someone, what is not being said right now? And what is the context of where this is going?
Yes, yes, yes. I love talking with you so much. The training that I'm working on right now focuses on director, senior director, but imagine VP, SVP, CEO, whatever level you're at. Imagine if you didn't empower people to speak up. Imagine what would happen if people that you've hired to be part of this team aren't speaking up. What have you done as a leader now to create that safety within the team or create that trust within the team to ensure that people are speaking up? We're talking about leadership styles today. There are the styles in history that have been very much identified. And I think today's leader empowers others. Today's leaders empower others to do their best work. I think they look for what's not being said in the room. And I think they need to have that open mind. You will not be getting the best out of your employees if you're not giving them a voice. And if you're not creating that environment where they feel that they can freely just speak up and put something forward that perhaps you wouldn't have considered. So is today's leader different than the ones previously? Probably in history. However, maybe that was what was missing. And maybe we've just learned since then that hearing diverse perspectives overall makes us stronger rather than weaker. And perhaps that's how we've evolved, which is a very exciting thing.
First, I love the idea of calling them the empowerer. I just love it. It's just
The empowerer.
Really fun to say. But I think with that psychological safety that leaders are required to create to make sure that they're maintaining and empowering the best environment and empowering their people, but also like, let's say someone, hopefully nobody in a leadership position feels this way, but let's say someone is like, well, people are empowered or whatever. Okay, what's in it for me? So I'll answer that by saying like, my biggest fear is that I would be in a leadership position and people would filter information too much before it got to me, or that they would feel like they couldn't tell me something. And now I'm making decisions based on bad information because I created the wrong environment. And so when you think about it also from like that perspective, so one, you want people to lean into their strengths and do their best work and feel heard and seen and celebrated and cherished and all the things at work that we can create for others. But also as a leader, these are the people who are building your organization, who are giving you information that you're making decisions on. I would want them to speak up. I want you to tell me everything, even if you think I'm going to hate it. And I might hate some of it. That doesn't mean it doesn't need to be said. I've seen leaders having a military background. I've seen leaders with a very directive style, and they just don't know how to get out of that. So other people are like, I'll be summoned before I tell him.
I think, and I'm sure this has happened to you as well at some point in your career where you didn't speak up and your gut was like, but I know the direction we should head. Like, I know what needs to be done. And you didn't say anything. And then 6 months to a year later, it happens. And you're like, that's what I was thinking. And I would be sad to know that happened to someone who reported into me. If I was their leader, I would be sad to know that they felt so strongly about something and just didn't say a word about it, whether it was good or bad, knowing that it A, could have prevented a crisis, or B, could have got us to a solution much more quickly than perhaps we got to it, or C, just could have been the most brilliant game-changing innovation of all time, but they just didn't speak up. With you bringing up what's not being said, that covers so many different elements of the role of one-to-ones, team meetings, but also what's going on with the projects, initiatives, goals of your team, and are you getting to that result or getting the best result possible? Are you cultivating that environment to do so with the members on your team?
Kristen, I don't remember if at the beginning of the session you had gone in depth about what your leadership style is. So could you tell us more about your specific leadership style?
My leadership style is a work in progress. That's what I would say my leadership style is. As I was thinking about this topic, I have, throughout my entire career, viewed myself as an independent contributor. So I haven't necessarily viewed myself as a leader, mainly because I was often collaborating with a team, but then switching into more of a role of leading projects rather than people. Or at least that's how I viewed it in my head. I am leading this project. Other people are involved, but I am leading the project. And so I really had to put some thought into it. And an exercise that I've done recently was to take a look at my values, my strengths, and start to consider what my leadership signature is. And this was hard for me because of, imposter syndrome and whatnot, all those little gremlins that sneak up. But when you're forced to really take a step back and say, okay, I'm going to own this. What is my style? What is something that I can put my stamp on and really stick to as I go forward? I started reaching out to folks and saying, this is something I'm starting to think about. I would love your feedback. I'm not looking for compliments. I'm looking for feedback on what is, what you think my leadership style is. And a lot of people used words like coaching, supportive, empowering others to experiment. I'm a huge fan of experimentation. Just try it on, see how it feels, and then we'll get to the end result somehow. So in starting to craft my leadership signature and start to take a look at what, my one-liner would be on what type of leader I am, the words, "Don't worry, we'll figure it out," came to mind. And so that's actually what I settled on as my leadership signature. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. Because I think often we take ourselves very seriously, and in some situations we have to. When you're working for large companies, there are super important initiatives. There are shareholders, there are stakeholders, there is the public, there's a lot to consider. So things can often get serious. But I think when we're dealing with specific situations, the second that we're panicking and the second that we're spiraling downwards is when things fly out of control. And I think for some reason, when chaos has been happening around me in my life, that's when I tend to get laser focused and know that it's going to be fine. Even if people are freaking out around me, it's going to be fine. We're going to be okay. So it was a really interesting exercise. And anyone listening, I encourage you to really put some thought into it on if you had to sum up the type of leader you are in one line, in like 10 words, what would you say? How would you explain yourself as a leader? Because it was a really empowering exercise for me to do, that when I walked away from it, I thought, okay, this is good. There's more of an identity towards what the collection of my experiences has yielded. So I would say right now, that is my leadership style, but it very much is a work in progress. And I think for most people, chances are whether you know it or not, it probably is a work in progress.
And I think you hit the nail on the head there too, with consistently evolving and learning. And I see sometimes people who've been leaders for a couple cups of coffee, they've been around, they get it, but then they realize that they don't get it, because as different things are emerging, as people want to be identified a certain way, as we start to talk about more social justice type things in the workplace, where we no longer are in a workplace where we can compartmentalize, the understanding that people cannot be compartmentalized, and that like work is work and home is home. Absolutely not. Those things flow into each other all the time, whether we are conscious of it or not. So leaders, especially those who kind of grew up as a leader in the space of you leave work at the door, you leave home at the door. Once you walk through there, you become this different person. And I'm really excited that mentality is going away, because now leaders do need to evolve to see the whole person. And how is this whole person showing up? And when I, as a leader, acknowledge the whole person, they're more empowered in the workspace to not only be themselves, but do their best work. They're not hiding this one thing about them or feeling like they have to push down this one thing that then is causing all this other internal turmoil.
Oh, Natasha. I love what you just said, because it actually shows how challenging it is to be a leader right now, because of the fact that you need to acknowledge the whole person that you're working with or that's reporting to you. And so what I think you've also done is open the door to understanding how important it is for leaders to make sure they have solid skills in resiliency, in self-care, in making sure that they're taking care of themselves, because with the shifting nature of leadership now and accepting the whole person, and let's not even get started on virtual and the work from home world that we've all been thrust into, that's a whole component of this. If you don't have that other piece of awareness as a leader to take care of yourself and also draw your own boundaries while accepting the complete person that's reporting into you, you're going to burn out. It's going to be such an awful situation. So that's a whole other set of coping strategies, skills, habits that leaders need to form in order to make sure that they're taking care of themselves while taking care of their teams at the same time. They are heroes, seriously. Regardless of whatever level they are at, there's so much to consider. Such a challenge, but those who do it well are just incredibly inspiring.
I agree. And I think that also with balancing those things, there's that aspect of vulnerability that fortunately we live in a world where Brene Brown exists, and she is helping us all to talk about it, which I absolutely love. And I think that when leaders can demonstrate that appropriate vulnerability, it shows that they do have that resiliency, that self-care while caring about others and caring about the organization. So I think that that's another skill I would add to that new set of things that leaders, of the 1 billion other tasks they have, also resiliency, that self-care and vulnerability. It not only makes them more relatable and all of that, but it also really shows other people that it's okay for them to take care of themselves and be vulnerable too.
And with the topic of this episode being leadership styles, what style is that then? That's what makes it hard right now. It's what we've been talking about. What style is that? Human? It's just tricky to sum up all of those nuances and all of those evolving character traits that perhaps 50 years ago just weren't. I'm sure they were there, but they were not normalized. They weren't normalized at that point. So I feel like leadership styles are probably due for an overhaul.
Earlier, when you said they're heroes, when you think about it, as a leader, you need to be able to navigate all these different styles depending on the situation. So what's your ability to read yourself, read the environment, adjust this style? Also, don't forget about self-care, also resiliency, also vulnerability. So we ask so much of leaders and we have these really high expectations when really what they're doing is, I like what you said earlier, where it's part of being human, right? And accepting this other responsibility and authority essentially is different than, like an individual or an independent contributor. But there's also this element of just being a good human and taking care of other people, right? Because really that's the core of really great leadership. The best leaders you've ever had, a lot of people are like, they cared about me. They made me care about something else. Like there's this element of they show you the humanity in yourself by revealing some piece of humanity about themselves.
Yes.
So what leadership advice would you offer current leaders in any organization?
There was a company I worked for. The relationships I made at this company were phenomenal. I still have close friends from this company. It was absolutely wonderful. But there was one key senior leader who worked for that company. And high stress job, I would say that he had. He had a fairly high stress job, but he was so active in what the rest of us were doing. He didn't just walk the floor. He would come around and just chat, often not about work at all. He made work light. We were talking about Liz Wiseman's Impact Players book today. He made work light, all the heaviness during different parts of the season or the year. He made it light. And there were a few times where there was a restaurant on the bottom floor of the building we worked in. And we would say, do you want to come for a beer with us? And he would always come. He would always come for a beer. And naturally, we would probably start talking about work, but he would be open to any ideas that we had. He couldn't guarantee that he would action them. And that would be silly for him to say, great idea. We're having a beer. I'll make that happen for you. That would be foolish to think that. But he at least would listen, and he would consider the possibility of it and also talk about what the impact would be if we implemented that. He was open. And so I would say leaders in any organization, do not lose that ear to the ground. Do not lose that curiosity to get to know your people as human beings, because the chances are that when you're doing that, some really insightful and creative business solutions will surface during those conversations. And you'll also build a strong team culture and build some great relationships. So I would say never lose that. As much as you advance, always make sure that you have that ear to the ground and that you're still having those conversations with folks at any levels of the company or organization.
Do you have a book or a resource that you recommend to others?
Natasha, how funny that you should ask that question today of all days. So today at our book club, we discussed Liz Wiseman's Impact Players. And I consider it, she outlines playbooks or of the playbook throughout the book. I think the book is the playbook because the amount of key takeaways that you can walk away with to implement to your own leadership practices, to being a more impactful contributor to your team, and also to build teams that are more impactful to the entire organization overall. Super good read. 100% recommend. 10 out of 10.
I love it. I agree. I think I took so many pages of notes, so many earmarks, so many like, where can I use this? How can I use this? Let's find ways to get this implemented today.
Agreed.
This has been so fun.
You are phenomenal. This was necessary for me to do for my own growth, and you did that for me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Equipping Leaders podcast. For more leadership development content, you can visit my website, natashacheyenne.com, where you will find my leadership journal with dozens of articles and the Cultivation Cafe, which is always growing and has leadership frameworks, book recommendations, and inclusion and mental health resources. You can also follow me on Instagram at novel_Natasha or at Equipping Leaders Podcast, and on Twitter at Natasha Cheyenne. Join me next week for another episode.